Today we're going to make a freezer flare-up recipe, chicken dumpling soup. Freezer flare-up is just what I call the stockpile in my freezer for days I have flare-ups or just don't feel well and need something that will soothe or just not upset my gut and requires minimal effort to reheat. I usually make this in as big of a batch as I can so I can eat some for dinner and then freeze the rest. First we need to start with the chicken. I prefer thighs because they have a richer taste, and maybe it's just me, but I think they reheat better in frozen soup than breast meat does. I'm using about 4 to 4.5 pounds of chicken thighs. Keep in mind though that these still have the bone in them, so in the end there is not going to be 4 pounds of meat in this soup. I've already trimmed off any skin and I'm adding them to my stock pot on medium-low heat. We could just let the chicken cook by itself, but instead we're going to cook it in the broth we'll use for the soup to enhance it by giving it even more delicious chicken flavor. After adding the chicken, I'm adding my homemade chicken broth. Check out my other video for the recipe. I'm using enough to almost fill up the pot since my chicken does have bones, and once I remove them, there will be less volume of chicken. If you're using boneless meat, then you may not want to fill to the tippy top so you can fit the veggies and dumplings in later. Cover and let this simmer until your chicken is cooked all the way through. While the chicken is cooking, it's time to prep the veggies. Carrots are low FODMAP and you can eat as much as you want, so they are going to be the main vegetable in my soup. I'm peeling and then cutting them. I prefer bigger pieces because I like them to still have a little bit of a crunch and not get too soft when cooked. That's just a personal preference, so cut yours into whatever size you like. The next thing I'm cutting up is a leek. The green leaves are low FODMAP, but unfortunately the grocery store did not have any with big green leaves, so I'm having to use the middle section, which is light green, almost to the bulb. The bulb is only low FODMAP in servings of 1 tablespoon per meal. And to be on the safe side, I'm going to consider this middle section the same as the bulb and only use a bit of it so that each serving of soup has less than a tablespoon. These are the only 2 veggies that I'm adding into my soup. If you want to add anything else, make sure you check to see if it's low FODMAP. I know celery is a popular thing in chicken soups, but it is only low FODMAP in servings of 0.35 ounces, so make sure you are checking the serving sizes, especially if you're planning on eating this soup to help with the flare-up. I love fresh herbs, so I'm also chopping up some fresh parsley, basil, and dill to add to the dumplings and to top the soup with at the end. The next thing I'm going to prepare while the chicken cooks is ginger. There have been some studies that show ginger can potentially alleviate IBS symptoms. Plus, I like the taste of it, so I like to add it to recipes whenever I can. I'm peeling a couple pieces that are a couple inches each and then chopping them into small pieces. You could also grate your ginger, but I'm all about less dirty dishes, so I usually just chop it if I'm not already using the grater for something else. Now the chicken is done cooking, so it's time to remove it from the broth. I'm going to shred this once it cools, so I'm placing it in a bigger dish so it can cool faster compared to being in something like a bowl. Once the chicken is removed, strain the broth to remove any gunk that came off while it was cooking. Once your pot is empty, wipe it clean if there's anything left behind from the chicken. Put your pot on low-medium heat and add some butter or garlic-infused ghee and your chopped carrots, leek, and whatever other veggies you chopped. Add salt, pepper, and let the veggies saute for a few minutes. While the veggies are sauteing, we're going to make our dumpling dough. I've already combined 2 cups of gluten-free flour, 1.5 teaspoons baking powder, salt, and pepper into one bowl. In the other bowl, I'm adding an egg to 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Next, stir in the dry ingredients into the bowl with the egg and olive oil. Slowly pour in some of the chicken broth and some of the fresh herbs we chopped earlier. Mix and add more broth as needed until you get a sticky dough. Back over at our pot, turn the heat up to medium and add in the rest of the chicken broth. I'm also adding in a very small amount, around a couple tablespoons total, of dried porcini mushrooms. These are low FODMAP in a serving size of 1 tablespoon per meal, and I'm adding them in now because they need the broth to rehydrate. I'm also adding in the chopped ginger, salt, pepper, fresh rosemary, and thyme. To add in the dumplings, use a spoon to form small balls of dough and drop them in. Gluten-free flour tends to be more dense, so I recommend making the balls smaller. I get a little carried away making them bigger and they end up being pretty dense, so maybe make them a little bit smaller than I did here. Once the dumplings are dropped in, cover and let this simmer while you shred the chicken. This is probably my least favorite part, but I remind myself that the thigh meat is tasty enough to make it worth the extra work of pulling it off the bone. Usually the dumplings are done in the amount of time it takes for me to shred the chicken, but you can do a taste test to be sure. Now that the chicken is shredded, it's time to add it into the soup, cover, and let it simmer long enough for the chicken to heat up. To serve, garnish with your fresh herbs and enjoy. After my family has eaten some of the fresh soup for dinner, it's time to let it cool and freeze the rest. I prefer to freeze single portion sizes in quart-sized freezer bags to make it easier to just reheat the amount I need. Putting the bag into a bowl can make it a little easier to hold it while you ladle it in. I like to add the fresh herbs into each bag after ladling the soup and then laying them flat in the freezer. Then when it's time to eat, I just break up the frozen soup in the bag a little before opening and dump it into a pot on the stove. If you prefer noodles over dumplings, I suggest not adding them in before freezing, but waiting until you reheat the soup. I've tried cooking the noodles in the soup, freezing, and reheating them, and the texture isn't as great as when they're fresh. Part of the reason I prefer the dumplings is not only the taste, but I've found that they freeze better and then it's less work when reheating. If you like this soup, subscribe for more low FODMAP recipes. See y'all next time!